Welcome to the Myth and Magic Authors Podcast, folklore and fantasy topics aimed at creative storytellers. To write stories and challenge your brain with exciting ideas, delve into these presentations and reflections. See how fantasy realms are based on actual world history, legend, and lore. Study fairy tales, nature fables, and supernaturalism to engage in a jumble of concepts that will trigger your fancy and get you writing imaginatively. Now, here's your host, Neil Mack.
Today, fantasy fiction fans, I have a real treat for you on Myth and Magic because I'm interviewing a real-life paranormal investigator. Dr. Kristy Sumner is a founding member of the Soul Sisters Paranormal organisation. Kristy and her team investigate paranormal activity using scientific methods. And if you're writing about close encounters, the spirit world, hauntings, ghosts or poltergeists, then you'll certainly want to listen to this interview to learn about how the experts in the field handle themselves. This is an exciting interview, so let's go straight over to Florida and to Dr. Kristy Sumner.
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you well. How are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you doing this evening?
Very good, thank you. Well, it's great to talk to you. It's lovely to meet you. Let me just tell you a little bit about Myth and Magic. This is a podcast for fans of fantasy fiction, and it's especially focused on fantasy fiction authors. And my listeners and I take paranormal beliefs very seriously, because most of us, to some extent, deal with the same kind of themes: supernatural phenomena, ghosts, poltergeists, life after death, reincarnation, faith healing, human auras, all that sort of thing. We're very conscientious and we're very reverential, I think, when it comes to mystical and metaphysical views. And I thought
Perfect.
You ought to know that right from the very start.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. So what we really want to know, I suppose, to start with is a little bit about you and about Jenny, where you grew up and what made you first become interested in the paranormal and why.
Absolutely. So my sister Jenny and I were twins, and we grew up in Ocala, Florida, which is about an hour's north of Orlando, Florida.
Yeah.
And just growing up, we've always had a belief in the paranormal. It's just one of those things that our upbringing just kind of led us to believe that there's something after this, right? Life does go on after this. I can't really say that we had an epiphany moment where we saw something or heard something. We always just had that belief that there is something after this, and sometimes that can manifest as an apparition or some type of voice or noise that you can hear audibly. And so we just always kind of grew up with that fascination and that belief. And so in 2014, we decided that if we had the chance to go on a paranormal investigation, we would do that. And in 2014, we had that opportunity when we went to Moundsville, West Virginia, which is where the West Virginia State Penitentiary is located.
Yeah.
And that's considered to be one of the most haunted locations in the U.S. And we had a friend of the family that sat on the board of that facility. And he said, since you're coming up to Moundsville, why don't you stay the night in the prison one of those nights and just see if you can contact any of our resident spirits. And so we jumped at that chance, and we come from a research background as well. So both Jenny and I have PhDs, so we are always looking for the why and the how, and the what ifs also. Yeah. And so when we went to Moundsville, we've had some unexplainable experiences. So we were hearing things in the moment. We were hearing footsteps, doors slamming, that sort of stuff that occurred in the moment. And so we left that investigation with an understanding of, yes, there is something after this. And
Right.
We wanted to really formalize a group to pursue that.
Yeah. And so that's the first incarnation, I suppose, of the Soul Sisters, is it? Because I read your stuff and you had a number of investigators, but you've kind of reduced that down to just you and your sister now. Is that right?
Correct. So we started as an all-female team of 5 investigators. So myself, Jenny, our younger sister, Michelle, and then 2 female family friends. And just because of logistics and kind of life changes in 2020, we decided to allow Jenny and I to be the primary investigators, and the other 3 would join when they could. We had people getting promotions. We had people, Kim had a grandbaby. And so just for logistic purposes, it was easier to coordinate with Jenny and myself, just the 2 of us, to go on these investigations rather than a team of 5. But for the majority of the locations that we went to, there was 5 of us, or at least a small subset of the 5 of us.
And is Jenny a identical twin with you?
Yes, we're identical. I was the little surprise for my family. They did not know that they were having twins. And so about 8 minutes after Jenny was born, I arrived, and we've been inseparable ever since.
And did you have any upbringing in the sort of Christian church or something like that? Was there any worship or anything like that before you went into science?
We did. So we grew up in a very spiritual household, but it wasn't one that was confined to a certain religion. Right. Our parents allowed us to really formulate our own spiritual beliefs. I will say I'm a Christian. I do believe in God. I do believe that there is a heaven after this. But my parents really allowed us to make those decisions on our own. We went to church services, not faithfully every Sunday or anything like that. But it is one of those things that kind of guided us. Our moral and ethical compass, I guess, was derived from those teachings. And so, and because of that, I think that's why we had a belief in the afterlife, why we believe that something happens after this. I mean, if you study the Bible, there's mentions of ghosts throughout, mentions of spirits throughout. So, for us doing this with Soul Sisters Paranormal, it has really strengthened my religious belief, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I can see that. Of course, that applies to every single religion, by the way. Every single religion, world religion, has got ghosts mentioned inside the religious texts or some of the traditions of those religions.
Absolutely.
So what was the motivation then behind setting it up, the actual organization, I suppose? Is it fair to say organization? What's the motivation behind it?
Yeah. And so after that investigation at West Virginia State Penitentiary, we really decided that we wanted to formulate this team in the hopes of, one, highlighting historical locations and telling our audience the importance of that historical narrative of those locations. Because there's a lot of locations that people might not know about. They might not know the history behind them. And for us, the history is really what drives what we do. And then secondary, what we wanted to do is, to the extent that we could, elevate this subculture, if you will, into a more professional mainstream appearance. So as I said before, we come from a research background. Both Jenny and I hold PhDs. We have 2 lawyers on the team and a master's holder. So we wanted to come at it from a research perspective, which is a little bit different than most other paranormal investigation groups. And so that's the reason why we really wanted to have that professional look and feel, because, as I said before, it really is a subculture, right? Paranormal is a subculture. The folklore, the belief in something like this, it is still seen as a subculture. So the best to what we wanted to do was it kind of bring that into the more mainstream in a professional way. So that's why our appearance is very important to us. Our look, our feel, our theme song, the way we approach our investigations, the way we, conduct ourselves on investigations, that reputation for us is extremely important.
Yeah. And at the end, say you finished an investigation, would that be a report that might perhaps be academic? Would it actually be filed as an academic type report, even if it perhaps isn't?
We have done that. In fact, earlier this year, I spoke at a symposium at Arkansas State University on the subject of paranormal, as well as paranormal tourism and historic preservation, because I think the 2 can go hand in hand. So, our investigations do catapult us into other discussions on an academic level. A lot of the investigations that we've done do lend to great speaking points on an academic level. And it also, again, allows us to speak to things in a community that people might not be aware of. And again, bring that historical perspective to a greater audience. For example, one of the locations that we investigated was the Ma Barker house in Central Florida. And this was the site of the 1935 shootout between Ma and Fred Barker, who were two members of the Barker Carpus gang, and the FBI. So it happened in January 16th, 1935, and it culminated with Ma and Fred Barker being killed inside this house. And when we investigated that house, we really brought that historical story to the forefront. And we had people coming up to us saying, I never knew this was in my backyard. I never knew this happened here, that, the national spotlight was on this small town in Florida in 1935.
Yeah.
And so that is really our driving focus behind what we do, is to bring those stories to light, to bring those facts to light for people who might not know that they actually exist.
So do you have a historian on your staff as well who is doing the research for the history side of things?
Well, to an extent, we're all historians on this team. We all conduct the research. We spend a lot of time in archives, in libraries. The Library of Congress is extremely helpful. The state archives, the city archives that we go into, and speaking to the locations themselves, talking to docents, talking to the volunteers and the owners of these establishments really allow us to get a historical perspective, and again, bring stories to light that people might not know about, and really, we get to have a very tactile experience with those locations, right? That a lot of people might not be able to have. And so we want to present that to the people that watch our videos. And so again, that's our driving focus.
So you then present that as a video film in the hope that it's like expanding the understanding and knowledge, not only of what you're doing, the investigation, but also it's providing that place with a bit of historical context as well, so that people who live there or people want to visit, they learn more about it.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we do. So if you watch any of our videos, the first 3 to 4 minutes is all history driven. We kind of tell why it's there, or what events transpired at that location that makes it important. And then we go into the investigation and our evidence that we found during that investigation. And then we tie it up in the conclusion with why both of those are important. To your point, to get people to recognize that it's there and possibly help preserve it if people want to visit it and, donate tourist dollars to it.
So it feels like we're approaching storytelling here, because you're obviously telling a story, even if it's in video form. You also have to listen to the stories which have been told about the place, and you've read those stories, so there is a possibility that you could be led up the garden path by some of those stories. How do you qualify some evidence before you get there? So how would you actually qualify that research evidence before you got there?
Well, like you said, the first thing that we do is actually look at the broad historical narrative of the location. Yeah. And then we try to the best that we can delve down and dig down into individual storylines. Yeah. So for example, the West Virginia State Penitentiary, I'll go back to that one. You have this broad facility that operated as a prison from 1876 to 1995. But yet inside of that, you have individual stories of the inmates and the prisoners that were in there. Yeah. And so we really kind of delve down into some of those. And then when we conduct the investigation, that research allows us to drive that investigation as well. It allows us to formulate questions to ask to see if we can get a response from those spirits. So again, we'll present the entire narrative of, say, West Virginia State Penitentiary, but then we'll go down and talk about inmate whose name is Red Snyder, and what his historical background was, and why he was in there, and why he was, such a menace to society, and then how we think we were able to communicate with him during that investigation. Yeah. And so we really take it from a broad, overreaching perspective and then delve down into it.
I'll be interested to hear about another investigation you've done, unless that's the one you want to use as an example, but I wanted to get an idea, and I'm sure all the listeners do, on your approaches and on the principles and also your intentions. Mm-hmm. So could you give us a sort of like a feel about that?
Absolutely. And that's a fantastic question. And I appreciate you asking it like that. First of all, our intentions behind this is to really tell the story of the location and tell the story of any individual spirit or entity that inhabits that location.
Yeah.
So when we go into an investigation, if you watch any of our videos, the driving theme throughout is, we want to tell your story. We want to know your story if you'll tell it to us. And so that's really the approach that we use. And the intentions that we go in with is one of respect of the location, and reverence for that location, as well as respect for the individuals that we're communicating with. Because we do feel that when we go into these locations, we're trying to contact those people that had a human existence. At one time they lived, they died, and for some reason they're still inhabiting this location. And so we want to recognize them for the humans that they were and really tell their story. The first thing that we do when we go to a location is we'll take a day tour. We'll look at the location in the daylight. We'll take notes on anything environmental that could be causing the reports of a haunting. So, for example, traffic noise, vehicular traffic, plane traffic, train traffic, anything like that could, when in the darkness, could be perceived as something paranormal. And we'll try to control for those things as best we can. And then we also look for places that will leave our stationary equipment during the nighttime investigation. And so then during the investigation, we'll go in and we'll start by setting up all of that stationary equipment. We'll leave night vision video cameras in certain locations. We'll leave voice recorders in certain locations. So even though we're not in a room or a cell block or something like that, we'll have eyes and ears on the location all night. We all wear body cameras. So we have a timestamp of where we are in the location. So if we hear something, if we catch something on an audio recorder or a night vision video camera, I can look back and I can say, okay, where was everybody during that time frame, to make sure it's not one of us causing that noise or that image on the camera. And then after that, we'll just spend the night actually doing the investigation. We'll do what we call EVP sessions. That's where we go into a room and we'll sit down and just ask questions. And those questions are derived from the historical research that we've done. Right. And so we'll just ask questions. A lot of time, it's really not like you see in popular television shows. There's a lot of sitting around in the darkness, essentially talking to yourself. And so then there's sometimes where we have audible responses that we can't explain. There's sometimes where we'll see things physically that we can't explain, but I'd say probably about 70% of what we capture are those things on the stationary equipment, right? Voices in rooms where we're not in, or shadow figures in rooms that we're not around. And so then after the investigation, we collect all of that audio and video footage, and we sit and we watch it all and we listen to it all. And then after that, we'll put it together. We'll find the things that we can't explain, and we'll put that in the historical context of the story that we'll go ahead and produce a video for.
Do you get any other senses? Do you ever feel, because some people say that they feel cold. Do you ever get that, or funny smells or anything like that? Have you ever had experienced that?
Absolutely. So when you go into these locations, even though a lot of when you watch any of our videos, it'll look like there's some ambient light, it's because we film in night vision. Yeah. The places that we're in are almost completely dark, like 100% of the time they're dark. And so your other senses really do take over. Your hearing is extremely heightened. Your sense of smell is extremely heightened, your sense of touch. And so there has been times where we do feel colder. There's been times where we've been touched. We really set boundaries when we go in, just saying things like, you're not allowed to touch us unless I say so. You're not allowed to come home with us. But there are times when, especially when we're trying to communicate with a child, where we'll say, do you want to come and grab my hand? Or can you give me a high five or something like that? And we've had responses like that. We've been physically touched. We've had physical things happen, like a door slam in front of us or a ball move when we've asked it to. And so we've had that physical manifestation of events happen to us and around us.
I like the very simple idea that you're obviously two girls. So if there's a man's voice, it's fairly obvious that is certainly shouldn't be there, or a child's voice shouldn't be there. So I like the idea that you've almost immediately cancelled that out. But if you heard a man's voice, what would you do about that? What was the next thing to do?
Well, we've heard men's voices, absolutely.
Right.
So probably a majority of the evidence that we've captured has been of the male gender. When we hear them in the moment, to us it's fascinating. So, for example, we were in Guild, Tennessee, at investigating a location called Hales Bar Dam, and this is a dam that runs a pretty substantial river. And underneath the dam, there's a series of tunnels, and so it's quite a labyrinth of tunnels and little rooms that served as the way that people would get from one end of the dam to the other. And so Jenny and I, at this point, we were down in one of the tunnels, and I just asked the question, "Can you say my name?" And we heard a very loud male voice say, "Kristy." And we captured it on audio. We captured it on video as well. And for us, it was fascinating because it shows that there's a level of intelligence and it's responding on command. So for us, we love when we capture things audibly like that. And, we've never run out of a location screaming. We've never, felt fear to the point where we have to leave a location. To us, we'll actually walk towards it to see if we can find an answer for it.
That was going to be my next question, because I'm sure the listeners will be asking, do you ever feel scared? Or what is the feeling? What's the sensation when you get something like that? Because we all know that the word spooked. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Yeah, for us, it really is like, I would liken it to being startled, kind of like what was that type of a moment. There are times where the hair will stand up on the back of your neck. You'll stand there and kind of get one of those fight or flight moments where things get a little colder. Your hearing gets very intense. Yeah. So we've had that. But once it kind of subsides and passes, again, we'll kind of walk towards it and see if we can get further responses, to see if we can probe further into, why they're speaking to us or why they're allowing us to hear them or see them. Yeah. And so that's what I would say. Startled is a good word, and kind of like an intense, okay, that just happened. A voice just came out of the dark. It responded when I asked it to, and it responded with my name. So that it's actually a pretty interesting and cool feeling when you're in the moment.
So let's talk a bit about my experience, because I was a wildlife crimes officer. I did wildlife crime investigations for many years in the 90s. Oh, cool. So I've got a criminal investigation background. And to give you an idea of the sort of thing I did, I was doing rural observations as a wildlife crimes officer. So I was protecting rare bird nests from egg collectors who would come in the night and steal them, or safeguarding habitats of rare and endangered species. So I've got an idea of how important it is that you get to the right place. That's the first thing I wanted to say. I've got a couple of questions using my own knowledge of this kind of area. One is that we had to rely on local guides and informants to get us to the right place, But I was always aware, and so were my colleagues, that informant, that very person who was leading you to the thing, could be the baddie. You never know whether that was the actual miscreant or not.
That's true.
Even if they weren't the baddie, even if they had the best of intentions, they often could be obstructive or interfere with our investigations. So I wanted to ask you, what's it like? How do you deal with the people who are probably trying their best to help, but how do you actually do that balancing trick with those people?
It's interesting. A lot of that really occurs for us during the day tours. As I said before, we kind of go in with a professional feel. So we have our polo shirts, which have our name on it, Soul Sisters Paranormal. And so when we're walking around during the day, the general public is generally there taking tours as well. So we get a lot of questions about what we do, how we do it. And then they're like, oh, you need to try this or try that. A lot of people ask about demons because, again, I think that's derived from watching the popular television shows. Yeah. So a lot of people want to know about demonic activity and how we deal with demonic activity. And, we kind of have to talk them down around that. But in the investigation itself, for the most part, when we're in these locations, we're left alone and it's quiet. We've had some locations where, it's kind of more populous, and you will have people outside the window yelling boo, or are you scared in there, or stuff like that. But we just really kind of overlook it, and just know that if we capture anything on the voice recorder at that time, that to disregard it. But for the most part, the locations that we go to are typically quiet, and we don't get a lot of outside interference when we go.
Yeah. And the other thing that we found was that obviously we're working like you in pitch black. Mm-hmm. We've got night vision equipment, very similar setup, I should imagine. But we found it very difficult to collect our evidence without making any noise and without showing any light. So I wonder if that's also something that you have experienced yourself, that because you've got to collect the evidence, because otherwise there's no point in doing the whole thing, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's a great example. So when we have our stationary equipment set up, as I said before, we're very cognizant of the fact that we could cause our own interference, right? That we could cause our own quote unquote haunting evidence, if you will. Yeah. And so how we approach it is, after the investigation, we take, as I said before, all of the audio footage and all of the video footage, and we don't run it through any type of software or anything. We watch it in the raw and we listen to it in the raw. Yeah. And so, like, for example, the audio recorders, all I do is plug in a headphone into the voice recorder and I hit play, and that's how I listen to it. And so what we do with that point is, if I hear something that I can't explain or that's some type of an anomaly, I'll clip that section and I'll send it to everybody on the team, and I'll just say, listen to this. And I won't tell them what context it is, nothing. I won't tell them anything. I'll just say, listen to this. And so then they'll respond to me individually and say, oh, I hear a man's voice saying this, or I hear a woman's voice saying this, or whatever. Right. And so we come up with a majority that all of us have to agree that we hear something and that we hear the same thing. It's kind of hard sometimes, because if you have a man saying waterfall, somebody might hear watermelon or something like that. Right. But we all come up with a consensus about what it's saying. And it's only then that we present it as evidence of something unexplained. If you watch any of our videos, we call it unexplained evidence, because in that moment, when we controlled for everything else, this is what we're left with. It's unexplained to us. Now, if somebody wants to come back and say, well, I think it's this, this, and this, then I want to have that conversation, because obviously I don't want to put out anything that's not factual. So that's why we call it unexplained. We won't call it haunted per se. We won't call it paranormal per se. It's unexplained to us at that moment. And so that's how we really present it. And so, like I said, all of us have to agree that we're hearing something, some type of an anomaly, or seeing some type of an anomaly before we put it out there as unexplained.
So the conclusion is always that it's either explained or unexplained. That's really the two conclusions you could draw.
Correct. Yeah. So if I see, so say, for example, we're investigating West Virginia State Penitentiary. We'll just go back to that one, right? Yeah. And I have a camera set up inside of a cell, and the way the camera is facing, it captures the inside of the cell, but also the hallway between the cells, right? And I see a light anomaly. Well, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the time of when that camera captured that light anomaly, and I'm going to cross-reference it with everybody's body camera to see if we were in that area at the time. And if we were anywhere near that area, then I rule it out and say, okay, that was most likely us. That's not unexplainable. I'm going to explain it as that was us, not paranormal, not unexplainable. Now, if I capture something and we're in a completely another building, and I know that there's nobody else in that building or in that area, then I'm going to chalk that up to me at that moment, it's unexplainable. There's no other light source. We're not around, and we've controlled for everything that we could. And that time frame, that's unexplainable to me. And that's how we label it.
Is there other paranormal investigators and researchers out there? And if so,
absolutely. Yeah.
Would they try to scupper your investigations?
You know, there is a large paranormal community. When you really start delving into it, there's hundreds of paranormal groups out there, and they range from, all male to co-ed, very few female, all female teams. And they range in age, and they really do range in intentions. We'll go back to that word. Right. You have those that just want to be YouTubers or bloggers or TikTok stars or something like that. So you really kind of have to couch it in those different categories as well. Yeah. But for those paranormal investigation teams that are similar to what we do, i.e. we're in it for the historical research, we're in it to find really legitimate answers as to what's out there, it really is a cool, close-knit type of a community. I've met paranormal investigation teams from all over the world, and, I'll share my evidence with them and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or I use this piece of equipment, or I use this technique and I got this. What do you think about that? We'll go to, they're called paracons, paranormal conventions. So we'll go to paracons, and talk to different teams and learn different techniques. And so really, it really is, kind of a close knit community. None of the paranormal teams that I've met have tried to undermine us in any way. All of them have been extremely supportive of us and of how we do what we do.
Have you got any particular new technologies, anything recent innovations helped you to collect evidence that perhaps they didn't have 10 or 15 years ago?
We really do. We've used, as I said, we use voice recorders and night vision video cameras. To me, the voice recorders are the best tool that we have, because I feel that a disembodied voice, or a voice that I can't explain, is one of the hardest things to debunk. To your point earlier, if I know that there's only 2 females in a cell block and I capture a male's voice, that's extremely hard for me to debunk. But we use things like laser grids in conjunction with our night vision video cameras. We found those to be extremely useful. There's been several investigations where we've had shadow figures cross in front of the laser grids and cut off the beams of those laser grids. We have a device that actually incorporates a laser grid with a temperature gauge that registers hot and cold spots. So if I set this up in a room and then a cold anomaly comes in front of it, it will not only cut off the beams of the laser grid, but also register the temperature differentiations as well. We have devices that measure electromagnetic energy. We call those K2 meters or REM pods. And those are very useful because if you go into a location where there is no power, theoretically, these should not go off in any way. They should not alarm in any way. So when they do, it's an interesting indication that something is acting upon it. Some type of an energy source that we can't see or explain is acting upon it. So we use those a lot in our investigations. And what we also do is we take trigger items. We try to come up with unique items that we can take into a location that are germane to the location that will attempt to elicit a response from a spirit. And so by that, I mean, when we go into a prison, I'll take a cigarette and I'll take some water, or I'll take some whiskey or coffee, because those are things that somebody inside a prison would want.
Things, aren't they?
Exactly. So kind of like, I'll leave this cigarette for you if you communicate with us. This is you. This is for you. I recognize that you're here. Here's this cigarette. Take it. Do what you want with it. Will you communicate with us? And we've been very successful in getting entities to speak with us or communicate with us by taking in those trigger items.
Would they actually move the trigger items?
We've had trigger items move. I'll go back to Hales Bar Dam. We had a glow in the dark ball that was inside an office. It was a former office. It was on the second level of the dam. It was an interior office. There's no windows. There's just one door. And we had the balloon or the ball sitting away from the door. So there was no way any wind or anything could affect this ball. And during the night, it started rolling around on its own. So that was interesting. We've had children interact with some of our trigger items, dolls as well as balloons. We were at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia. And we believe we contacted the spirit of a young child. Her name was Lily. And, she acted, it was interesting because we had a glow in the dark balloon. We had one of those K2 meters that measures electromagnetic energy, and we had a flashlight sitting on a windowsill, and there's no power around it. There's nothing that's going to act upon these 3 objects that are sitting on this windowsill. And we were back probably about 10 feet from this windowsill asking questions. And we said, can you move or touch one of those items on the windowsill? And simultaneously, the balloon starts rolling, the K2 meter starts indicating a power surge, and the flashlight turns on. And so those 3 things were very indicative that something was acting upon them at the same time. So that was very intriguing to us. So
all 3 happens at the same time.
Exactly. So when we get that validation, when we have multiple things happening on different pieces of equipment at the same time, that validation just really heightens our argument that something is acting upon it, and it's something that we can't explain.
Do you ever take a monitor in there which might be able to detect noxious gases or fumes?
No, we haven't done that before, actually.
I just wonder.
No.
Yeah, there are some nasty things which can invade, especially if you're underground or in an enclosed space, which could, I don't know.
That's interesting. I've never even thought of that before. Most of the time we just rely on our noses, but that's fascinating. I'll have to try that, honestly.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is, would you ever use a medium? Would you actually take a medium with you?
We would. We have not done that yet. I've had people asked if we have done that. We haven't. It's just one of those things that the opportunity just never has really arisen, that we would take a medium, but it is something that I'm completely open to, kind of maybe have a medium go in before us or after us to see if we can corroborate what each other is feeling or seeing or hearing.
Yeah.
If the opportunity arises, we would absolutely do that. But to date, we have not.
Well, I think more or less gone through everything that I wanted to ask you. Is there anything that you think you should be telling our listeners? I think we've covered most of it. And what I'd like to do is just ask, where people should go. Number one, to follow you. Number two, to get your merchandise and your materials. And also, more importantly, where they should contact if they think that they need some help. So,
yeah. This has been a great interview, and I really appreciate your questions. They're just, kind of on a different level than the questions that I normally get. So thank you for that. If anybody wants to contact us, the best method to do that is on our website at www.soulsistersparanormal.com. Pretty much anything you want to know about us is on that website. All of our videos are there. The locations that we're going to be going to next, any appearances or guest appearances that we'll be at, will be listed there as well. We're also very active on Facebook under Soul Sisters Paranormal, and our YouTube channel is Soul Sisters Paranormal as well.
Oh, that's really good. And have you got some merchandise that people can get?
We do, on our website, soulsistersparanormal.com. We do have t-shirts and such for sale. And that really just kind of goes to fund some of our investigations. Yeah. Everything that we do is self-funded. So we don't have sponsors or anything like that. It really is all self-funded. So the t-shirt sales and the hat sales and stuff just kind of, offsets that cost a little bit.
What are you doing in the day? What is your day job, you and Jenny?
My day job, I've kind of run the gamut, actually. Formerly, I was a college professor. I taught aviation security and aviation marketing and management. My background is also in criminal justice, so I taught some criminal justice classes as well. Currently, my best friend and I have just opened a haunted museum and location in Huntsville, Tennessee. We were able to acquire a jail that was built in 1904. And 2 weeks ago, we opened it up to the general public so they can come in and take general day tours, as well as book it for a private paranormal investigation or join us on a public paranormal investigation or a public ghost hunt.
So is that ready to go? Is that ready to roll now then?
Oh yeah. We opened 2 weeks ago. We've already had 3 paranormal investigation teams come in. We've booked dozens of others already. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting location. Like I said, this jail was built in 1904. It was in operation as a jail until 2008. And there's a lot of interesting stories behind it. And, the times that we've been inside of it, just doing general cleaning and stuff, there's some things in there that we cannot explain. We've heard men's voices. We've heard doors slamming, footsteps running up and down the stairs. So to us, it's a very interesting jail and one that we're really proud of.
Would you like to share the website of that then, please?
Absolutely. So you can find more information at www.historicscottcojail.com. And it's the historic Scott County Jail in Huntsville, Tennessee.
Is Scott got 2 T's or 1?
2.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And the only other thing I noticed was this ghost biker explorations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that before you go.
Yeah. Yep, Ghost Biker Explorations. So my best friend Miranda Young, she's also my business partner in the historic Scott County Jail. So Miranda Young is the Ghost Biker, and we actually met during a paranormal investigation. And she has her own web series called Ghost Biker Explorations. And what she does is she rides her Harley Davidson motorcycle to haunted and historic locations. Again, telling the history of those locations, and then doing a paranormal investigation. She actually investigates solo, and she puts those in on videos on her YouTube channel.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like the plot of a book, if ever I've heard one.
Yeah, she's very interesting. Like I said, we met a couple years ago. We collaborated on an investigation in North Carolina, and we just clicked. We became best friends, and like I said, now we're business partners in the jail venture. But her web series is extremely exciting, and she drops all of her episodes in October. So she's got her season coming up here soon. But yeah, she's a very interesting person and a very good friend.
Well, I'll put your links, and I'll put her link, and any other link I can find, I can put that on my website as well, so that at least everybody can be able to find all that stuff.
Well, thank you.
Do you ever do any reading and writing? So you've obviously been a professor, so you must have written lots of theses.
Yes.
Have you done any creative writing yourself?
I have. We're actually trying to publish a book on Soul Sisters Paranormal. Currently, it's a bunch of notebooks with all of our writings on it. We haven't really got it, into a published state yet, but it's hopefully going to be ready to go by early next year. So we'll be putting that out on our website as well.
Yeah, let us know, and we can maybe have another chat, and we'll talk about the book then as well. So that'd be
absolutely.
If you actually were just relaxing, what would you read?
Oh goodness. Relax. I haven't, for me, it really is like science fiction books.
Right.
I really do like the science fiction genre, and I really like all things science fiction. Like Star Wars is my favorite movie of all time. So probably more in the science fiction genre is where I would go.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time of your evening. So how many times would you do an investigation? Is it once a week or once a month?
We try to do at least 5 what I would call larger investigations a year. Right. So again, for us, it's all about logistics because we are professionals and work in our careers. So we try to do at least 5, but we do have little spin-off locations that we'll do as well. Kind of like weekend excursions. So yeah, probably between 5 and 10 a year is what we do.
Okay. So when's your next one?
Our next one will be in January in Tennessee. We're hoping to get to Old South Pittsburgh Hospital. But then Jenny and I will also be investigating the jail that we have right now, the historic Scott County Jail. We'll be doing that hopefully here in October.
Okay. Well, come back to us and talk to us about your book once that gets going. Even if you're only halfway through getting it published, we'd love to hear about it. And thank you very, very much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. I hope you have a great evening.
You take care.
Bye.
Bye.